Welcome into the Bearcast on SicEm365.com, presented by WellMed Medical Management. I'm here today, joined by Ashley Hodge, basketball guru, basketball analyst, and you have been busy, Ashley. We've been talking transfer portal a lot on our board, but now we actually get to talk about it a little bit more. I know this is an exciting time for you, and I know for most Baylor fans, it's been kind of an adventurous one, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's not every year you turn over your entire roster, but that's the new world of college basketball, and Baylor's one of those teams that's going to welcome every single face to this team. This next year is going to be someone unfamiliar. Well, unfamiliar from the aspect of they haven't worn a Baylor uniform. There will be some familiar faces. Dan Skillings Jr. is one of those. He played at Cincinnati in the Big 12, so Baylor fans will probably remember him. And obviously a lot of players to be excited about. I really like the way this roster is coming together. There's a couple more pieces that will finish things off, but I'm optimistic. I think this is more of the Moneyball approach where you value wingspan, rebounding, defense, steals, blocks above offense, offensive efficiency, which tends to get overpaid in the transfer portal. So I like where Baylor's headed here.
So let's kind of go back to the very beginning. Obviously, Baylor lost everyone on the roster from last year. Now, most of that was expected. And right. You had mentioned that on the premium side of things. Like, everyone was pretty much expected to leave except for Rob Wright, which he obviously transfers to BYU. There were some other guys that I think maybe could have stayed if some things worked out.
Jalen Celestine, they thought they would probably get back. But yeah, those were the two. But Jalen Celestine was always a little bit more tenuous, but yeah, they thought Rob Wright was going to be their guy. They were building around him. They offered him a very fair and lucrative at the time NIL deal, and he signed it. And they were constructing a roster based on his strengths and his weaknesses. And then we all know what happened. There was some clear tampering in the portal. BYU comes in, swoops in, offers him a bag that at least his dad couldn't refuse, and Rob Wright's off to Provo, Utah, to play for BYU. But yeah, it was quite a shock, and then Baylor scrambling to try to go to Plan B at that point. But I think they've pivoted really well and added some really nice pieces.
And I do think that people have tried to make this more of a story than it really is. Like talking about, oh, Baylor's lost this whole roster. There's something wrong with the culture of Baylor. There's something wrong with this and that. And really, I mean, when it comes down to it, I mean, this team wasn't very good last year. Like, they had to change a lot of things. And like, you can say, oh, they had good moments. They were a fine team. That's fair. But you also weren't getting VJ Edgecombe back. Like, you weren't getting your best player. And so, yeah, Norchad as well. And so I think people are just kind of making a story out of this when it's not really a story. It's just a necessity that Baylor had to go into the portal, had to change up some things and change up simply the construction of the roster.
Right, and technically we do have a returning player, Cameron Carr, but he was sitting out as part of the transfer process. Yeah, it is kind of surprising to see all new faces on the Baylor uniforms, to have no continuity at all. But it's the way of college basketball today. And the good news about Rob Wright leaving was, when in this world of NIL, that money had not been paid to him, so that was money that could be slotted for another player. And I think they've made the decision to go longer and more physical and more of a defensive identity, and I think that's going to pay off.
So big picture wise, I think last year's team, there were some clear things that they just did not have. They didn't have depth down low. They didn't have size. They didn't have length on the perimeter to guard athletic guards. They didn't have athleticism outside of VJ to get by athletic guards either. And so it's basically just guarding the 3-point line. If you block out Norchad Omier enough, like, you're going to get rebounds. You're going to be able to push the tempo against Baylor last year. That's changed. And that's been like a fundamental thing that Baylor has addressed this offseason, is they have so much size and so much length and so much athleticism. It's been a complete shift, which obviously was something that I think we saw last year. And I think Scott Drew and the staff just kind of sat back and realized, like, we need to have more size on the perimeter and we need to have more depth down low. And they've clearly addressed that.
Yeah, your concern is always that you will sometimes overreact in the other direction. That was a clear weakness of this last year's team. And sometimes, a coaching staff will react and go too extreme to the opposite end of the equation. But I think there's enough balance here. Scott Drew teams have been consistently good on the offensive end. And even on paper, when it didn't look like they would be great on the offensive end, they've managed to, put together a really good offense. I think back to Davion Mitchell and Maceo Teague's first year of playing together. That was a solid offensive team, but really, really good on the defensive end. Freddie Gillespie was manning the middle, and great shot blocker, great positional defender, great rebounder. I think this team maybe have more of that kind of identity to it, where it could be really, really good defensively, but still good enough offensively to win a lot of games and compete for a Big 12 championship. So that's my hope. I don't think it's going to rival some of the elite offenses, the Adam Flagler, Keontae George, LJ Cryer, or, especially the national championship team from an offensive standpoint. But I do think defensively, and if you offensive rebound well, which has been a real staple of Scott Drew teams, you create so many extra possessions, and that just gives you an automatic boost in your offensive efficiency if you can get 5, 6, 7 extra possessions per game than the other team.
It's interesting to me that you mentioned the 2020 team, because the team that I was thinking of actually was that 2022 team that obviously, lost to North Carolina, right. But that size, definitely a focus on the defensive side. They don't quite have a James Akinjo kind of just like probing and leading the offense through the pick and roll, but you do have a lot of length, and you got size, and you have depth, which that team had until Everyday John got hurt. Yep. But I think in general, those two teams make a lot of sense for comparisons. I don't think this is going to be a top 10 offense, but what I do think this is going to be is potentially a top 25 defense, which is where Baylor needs to get back to.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and the switchability is great. Talking to one of the coaches a couple days ago, his comment was that I just love that almost every player on the team can play 2 or 3 positions, and then you got a guy like Skillings who can play maybe all 5 positions, a 7'2" wingspan, a strong body, able to handle the ball pretty well. He can play down low. He can play at the point of attack. You're not going to want him to be your primary creator, but you're not going to want him to be your primary center. But in a pinch, he can do all those things. And so you got a lot of versatility. Obviously, Tunde Yesufu is a guy that's coming in that's got a lot of versatility, kind of like Skillings in that area. And Cam Carr, another wing that's very versatile. Michael Ratai, a guy that can play outside, a guy that can play inside. So you got some pieces here that really give you lots of options lineup wise, and I think that's going to equate to wins, and I think it's going to equate to a fun basketball team to root for.
So during this process, the guy that I just came away thinking, man, I think he's going to be a huge difference maker, is actually one who I think the board and I think a lot of people are torn on, and that's Dan Skillings Jr.
Yeah.
I think he is going to be really, really good. He had very unfortunate circumstances this past season, but really good scorer. I think Baylor fans, if you watch Cincinnati play Baylor the last 2 years, he's in 3 of 4 of those games, he really went at Baylor and scored, and he's athletic. He can rebound. He can get to the rim. And I still think there's some 3-point shooting upside there. But aside from Skillings, he was kind of the guy that stood out the most to me. Is there a guy that really stood out the most to you initially when they committed?
Well, I think Ratai. I think he's just his approach. He's very professional in his mindset, and he's got international experience. He's taken huge leaps every year. Like, his numbers have really seen some pretty strong growth from year to year. So I think I'm expecting really big things from him. Just watching that Gonzaga game, where they beat Gonzaga, he scored 29 points. I mean, he can score in a variety of ways. He can score from 3-point line. He can score mid-range jumpers. He can post you up. He's a good offensive rebounder. He's got the complete package, and so I expect him to be the main threat, in the post. Caden Powell is pretty skilled as well as a post scorer, but I do think Michael Rataj is going to be a guy to watch. And it's interesting you bring up Skillings. I'm a Skillings fan. I was really happy when we got him. I do wonder, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, Cincinnati fans call him Baylor Dan because he played his best against Baylor. And I wonder if it's kind of a similar deal with Rob Wright. Rob Wright had a terrific game at BYU, and is BYU overvaluing that one game versus the body of work? And is Baylor overvaluing how well Dan Skillings played against Baylor versus the body of work? Time will tell. But let me bet on the guy that's got a 7'2" wingspan versus a 6'3" wingspan every day.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely. Yeah.
My
I can't wait to dive into that one because I got some stats that I'm going to hit Baylor fans with that should ease some concerns on
well,
who
and
he played
defensively,
well against.
there's no way. I mean, he's a good defender. He's a good defender. He gets steals and blocks. So even if he's not as good offensively as what you hope for, he's going to be a really good defender. So that's important. So hopefully he'll have a Jalen Bridges type impact, and the staff can do with him like they did with Jalen Bridges and prepare him for an NBA career, because I think he's got that kind of talent. I think he's a potential NBA player.
So looking at this roster, I still think there's at least one pretty glaring hole. And then maybe like you can add another body of some kind, a bigger body, maybe a rebounder. But when you kind of look at what Baylor has left to do and maybe what you've heard, seen, what you believe, what's left for them in the portal?
Well, I think they want one more clear rotation player, meaning a top 8 guy. And that's going to be a combo guard, I believe. So they want another guy that's a creator, a shot maker, can shoot threes, and is a good ball handler. I think it's going to be a little bit of point guard by committee. JJ White from Omaha is a proven point guard. Obi Agbem, I think, is going to be really good as a point guard. Certainly guys like Tunde and Dan Skillings, can give you some of that as well. But I think you're going to see them add a combo guard, and then Isaac. We're forgetting about Isaac Williams too. He's a guy that I wouldn't sleep on. I had a trainer tell me really good things about him, and then I was playing some pickup basketball with a guy that's a part of that AAU program, and he's just like, man, he's a winner. He's a winner. Like, I don't care about his offensive stats. He's a winner. Period. And so he's going to be a guy that's going to compete. And he's a really good ball handler. He can get to the rim, and he's a good 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. So I'm not sleeping on Isaac. But I think combo guard, and then I think a rotation piece down low are the two things that you'll see the roster finish out with.
That's kind of what I've been looking at as well. I know a lot of people are looking at the point guard position and trying to find a true point guard. And I think we've talked about this a little bit. Point guards are really, really expensive right now in the transfer portal, and you're paying for guys who aren't really like high level point guards. And so it's kind of like, do you spend your money on that, or do you kind of bet on, hey, you know what, maybe we can make things work with multiple combo guards? Because I kind of believe all the guys they have are more combo guards than they are true point guards. But I think you can make that work. And Baylor's had teams in the past that have kind of made that work. Maybe not the highest level, but they've made it work. Like Makai Mason, Jared Butler, once Butler kind of came on. If you had been talking about a sophomore or a junior Jared Butler with Makai Mason, it would have been very different. It just was he was a freshman, so they ended up with an 8 or 9 seed, and Makai couldn't get healthy. But in general, that's kind of what I'm looking at. 2 combo guards that can really run the pick and roll and can really shoot the ball and score. I think it makes a lot of sense if you can't really afford or don't want to pay up for a point guard.
Yeah, I think about the teams. Was it Kenny Cherry, Lester Medford, Royce O'Neal? Obviously, Cherry was a point guard, Lester was a point guard, but when you have that other guy or those other guys that can handle the ball well on the perimeter, it does take some pressure off, having that primary point guard. So I think Baylor has enough of that on the perimeter. Cam Carr, you got Tunde Yesufu, you got Isaac Williams, you got Obi Agbem, you got JJ White, you got Dan Skillings. There's enough skill with ball handling to not make that a glaring weakness, in my opinion. Now, Scott Drew teams have been very reliant on primary ball handlers in the past, and so you're going to have to coach differently and have a different mindset. But I do think there's enough of the point forwards on the roster that you can put them in the high post, let them operate, initiate offense from the high post, and I think we'll be just fine doing that.
If you were to give kind of what Baylor's done in the transfer portal this offseason a grade, what would you give it?
Oh, it's a good question. Well, I think given what they're working with, given the curveball that they've been thrown with the Rob Wright situation, when I say what they're working with financially, I'd say I'd give them a B+ or an A. I think it's I like what they've done. It reminds me of what Florida did to win a national championship last year. Now, Florida had some continuity. I don't want to get too ahead of my skis here. Baylor's having to, start from scratch, and they don't have guys returning like Clayton, Richards and so forth. But what Florida did, which I mentioned in the beginning, is they didn't have any top 100 guys on that roster. There was mid-major transfers. And what is better value in the transfer market? Well, teams will overpay for offense and they'll overpay for flash. And if you go in and looking at defense, wingspan, stocks, a very popular term these days, blocks and steals, and you're looking at offensive rebounding in general, those things won't get valued as much in the transfer portal. And I think Baylor's put a real emphasis on that. There's a lot of ways to win basketball games, and I think Baylor's got the formula that's going to work for the coach that I think they're going to bring in, and to fill out the staff, and also just to really get back to this a true version of this switch everything type defense, which I think works with the right personnel. We were frustrated with it, but it's because of personnel, right? We needed better personnel to run that defense.
Absolutely. They didn't get enough tip passes, didn't put enough pressure on the pick and roll guys. I mean, there was a lot of glaring weaknesses and too many mismatches on the court. I'd probably give it a B+ as well. I think you look at these transfer portal rankings, and pretty much everyone has Baylor outside the top 25 in the portal because you're taking into account losing Rob Wright, who they have ranked as like a top 10 guy in the portal. But I think in general, Baylor's done a nice job turning over the roster, and I think they've given themselves, frankly, an opportunity to actually compete in the Big 12. And if everything hits, I mean, they could be a little bit sneaky next year with how veteran they are. We'll see how they close out the portal experience. But Baylor fans, I do want to mention Ashley and I are going to be doing a full rundown of every single player on Baylor's roster for the most part. I don't know if we're going to hit on the walk-ons, but we're going to hit on every single player that we can so that everyone can get to know these guys. I mean, it's a totally new roster. So Ashley and I will probably spend like 10, 12 minutes on every single player. Those will be kind of every single day, hopefully over the next week or two. And we'll see kind of how that all turns out. But Ashley, we're going to talk a lot over the past couple of weeks, but thanks for joining the Bearcast today. Really appreciate it.
Great to be on.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for listening. This has been the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.